Madeira Companies, welcome back to our internal podcast, Touch Base. We are here kind of at the beginning of this journey as we discuss diversity, equity, and inclusion. Hopefully you've gotten a chance to watch a couple of the previous podcasts, especially the ones with our CEO, Dave Gillis, and one of our partners, Dave Marcinkowski. As cool as those two guys are, I'm actually more excited about today's kind of conversation, interview. I want to introduce you to one of my new friends. His name is Kevin McConic, and so he's here to be a part of this, to share with us some of his expertise, and I do mean that because Kevin is the Regional Chief Diversity Officer for Covenant Health. That is one of our biggest caregivers and medical professional places in all of Lubbock, West Texas. And so it's great to have you here. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, absolutely, Josh. I sure appreciate you just inviting me here. I think it's a great opportunity to come and talk. Being a part of Covenant has been wonderful. The Regional Chief Diversity Officer there, as you said. A ministry of over 6,500 people here in Texas and New Mexico. And so really trying to do some great work in this space. Got some great support working there and really just continuing to learn on my own journey when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, and let's talk about that, your journey here for a little bit. I know you and I have had a few lunches together and just getting a chance to talk about this type stuff, but for our folks out here who are just kind of wondering a little bit about you, give us kind of a quick bio, kind of who you are, maybe a little bit about family, and just kind of how you got here.
Yeah, so I am, I'm Lubbock born and bred. I've been here really all my life. Couple years, moved to Dallas right after I graduated from high school and lived there for a little bit, but been here all my life. Matriculated through Lubbock ISD schools and came through there, graduated high school there. And really for me, wanted to go right into college. I didn't do particularly well when it came to going to college at the very beginning.
There's probably a lot of freshmen out there like, I did not do well,
I did not do well. It was bad. As a matter of fact, I'll be very transparent. I had a .137 GPA after 3 semesters. It was pretty rough, to be honest with you, and I just didn't do well.
At one point, does that become like almost impressive?
Nobody was really impressed by that. I'll tell you, not my mom and not the people that were supporting me going. They weren't impressed at all. And neither was Texas Tech at that time because they politely told me I could take some time off. So it's great, but went and really after that started a family. I've got 3 wonderful grown kids, but started a family and been doing really great stuff. Kind of worked in a lot of different industries, done a lot of different things, from working on the railroad as a conductor to cleaning toilets with a local company here, all the way to more recently doing things like leadership development at United Supermarkets and as manager of community partnerships and education there. Yeah. More recently, I've worked with South Plains College and opened up our Lubbock campus here in 2017, I believe, opened up that campus. And then, but just currently at Covenant Health. And so just a single parent home. And I went to a really diverse elementary school in Isles Elementary. It was really foundationally really great for me, being on the east side of Lubbock, but having the kind of kids at that time we were being bused. I was being bused to, across town, and those kids were being bused to us. And so we built some amazing, genuine relationships there at Isles, and really is, for me, as I think about it, foundational to my understanding, and I think just having emotional intelligence when it comes to people.
Yeah, and so I want to just step on that real quickly because I think that's huge. The idea that we often think, when we think historically about busing, we think that took place like 150 years ago. Yeah. Like that's kind of the connotation I think it comes up. But the idea that here you are, we're close to the same age. Yeah. You and others were bused into the same school. And that just speaks to the recency of some of the issues that we've had with this very conversation of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of things that kind of move us to thinking that way. When you think about pictures, even from the 70s and 80s, sometimes they're in black and white, and it makes it feel like sometimes it's a long time ago, when in reality, many of us have those experiences and have gone through and dealt with whatever it is that we were dealing with. So yeah, it's pretty recent. We were going there, But we had, just like I said, the foundation there that was built because of the ability to come in as young people and get to know folks for who they are and love on folks. I have lifelong relationships with people that I would have never known outside of that, outside of us doing that busing.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your outlook on that. I'm glad you have that experience. I'd like to kind of jump into your current role a little bit and learn kind of like how did you get to that role? Yeah. You've gotten to do a lot of very cool things in your journey, but like that's a really neat role for you to get to play, especially for Lubbock, Texas.
Yeah, it is. Specifically, as you said, for Lubbock, Texas, I don't think that there are many roles of chief diversity officers here in Lubbock that I know of. There's 3 of us here in Lubbock that actually do that role at that level. And so a lot of companies doing the work, right, have committees and different things, but having someone to lead at an executive level. I will tell you, it did just kind of happen, but didn't. I think that all along that I've been being prepared for the work. I mean, you have life experiences, right? And I think that really for me, God has put me in a place to learn and understand people at a different level. I feel like I have a pretty high emotional intelligence, and so I'm not good at a lot of things, right? But I'm good at people, and so. But just through relationships, really, I think more than anything else, people knowing that I understand how to talk people, how to get through tough conversations, and for us here in West Texas, sometimes with the connotations attached to diversity, equity, inclusion, they can be really tough conversations. And so just having those discussions and being honest with people about where I stand, people trusting me and who I am and my authenticity, I think it just becomes really important. And so just over time, they could have hired someone that had all kinds of experience in diversity, equity, inclusion proper, right? Somebody that actually has, all in the context and all the terms and all that. And I had none of that. But what I did have is a heart for it and an ability to learn and just really a willingness to work with people, because we're all on a journey, right? When it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, understanding what it is, the knowing, but also how we practice it with one another.
Yeah, you bring up a couple of interesting things. You've talked about West Texas a little bit, and we have, we have several. We have a lot of people from our companies, different companies, who are in DFW or are in Houston, and now we're in Austin, and then we have a bunch here in Lubbock as well. And so I think a lot of times people think like, well, there's Texas culture, but then there's also like these subcultures, right? There's subcultures even within cities.
Sure.
And I think there's a lot of our folks in DFW and in Houston and then in Lubbock who don't necessarily know each other's subcultures or maybe like, well, I kind of like my subculture a little bit better because I like living here. But all that to be said, it struck me as you were talking about the contextualization. You talk about being prepared as a West Texas guy, knowing West Texas and how to navigate relationships in West Texas. One of the things I appreciate about you, and I've seen this in our conversations, is like you have a love for this context and all demographics of this context. Sure. Could you talk about that? And here's one of those moments where I didn't really prepare you for that question.
Well, thanks a whole lot, Josh. I was warned about this.
That's true. That's true. But I'd love to hear that because, DEI is contextual. Like, here is my group of people. Here's my circle of influence and places for me to jump in and help. What is it about the contextualization and the way you've been prepared that has helped you navigate West Texas?
Well, I think it's important, Josh, that we learn how to meet in the middle. I think that there's always common ground. The whole idea of diversity is difference, right? It's that we're going to have diverse ideas, thoughts, the way we're brought up, the things that come to us. And sometimes that brings on this idea of cognitive dissonance for us many times, right? Meaning, sometimes because of who taught me and where they taught me, whether it's my father or the pastor or whether it's people around me or even now on Facebook when I continually get things that undergird my thoughts and what I believe, right? That whole cognitive dissonance comes into play, right? And so just knowing that there's different realities out there that are not necessarily my reality is important. As an African American person, as a Black person that lives here, I've always been in spaces where I was the minority. And so for me, I had to learn how to operate in those spaces. And it almost feels like you can be a victim in that sometimes, right? And so, but what I learned and what I've learned over time is that as a white person, that you have a different experience from mine that's also difficult, right? Because I was always tell this story about I had a boss when I worked at United Supermarkets, and just to understand this a little bit better, we went to a funeral. It was a funeral of one of our black team members, or their parents or something, I can't remember. And he came into the room, into the church, black experience, which he'd really never done. I'd done it because I live here, and I've always done that. And so he'd never really done that. And when we came back to our office, he said, "Kevin, I don't know if you realize this, but I was the only white person in the room." And I said, "Will, I don't know if you realize this, but I'm almost always the only black person in the room."
Yeah.
And Will, I think some people think that folks are willful in the fact that they don't understand this, but we'll never had to experience that, right?
Yeah.
And so, but it was normal for me. So back to your question, the reason why it's easy for me is because I love people, number one, and all of us have different experiences, and I want to meet people where they are based on their experience. You know, these pictures, right, that we have that are about perception. Like, some people see the old man in the picture, some people see the young man in the picture, but sometimes people don't see both, and that's how I see it. It's about perspective at the end of the day. And so, how do I, even though this wasn't my experience or my perspective, how do I recognize and realize that there's actually another real, true perspective that people experience, right? Yeah. And how can I be beholden to the idea that we ought to meet in the middle about this? Not that I need to always agree with it, right? But validating the experience that I may not have ever seen, I may not have ever understood, I may not even think is present. Yeah. But realizing that for some people, the experience, even though we're looking at the exact same thing sometimes, that experience is actually, different.
Yeah, as you're talking about this, I'm reminded of one of the books that I loved. It was very formative for me a few years ago. It was called Being Wrong by Catherine Schultz. I don't know if you've read this book, but she talks about the kind of the three levels of disagreement and how people kind of progress through that. And she says that, kind of this first level is you and I talk about something, whether it's experience or perceptions or worldviews or whatever, and I come to realize you don't agree with me. Yeah. And so my first thought is, well, you must be ignorant. So I need to teach you, and I will explain to you. And then once you come to this newfound education, you'll see the world the way that I see the world. Yeah. And then we get to a point where it's like, well, I've told you what I know, and you still don't agree with me. You must be an idiot. And that's her next kind of roll in. She goes, you're just not smart enough to take on the worldview that I have. Wow. And then I come to realize in this third session, or this third section of it, she goes, I realize that you're not ignorant and you're not an idiot. You're actually really smart. You just still have a different worldview. Yeah. Well, you must be evil. And that's the progression that a lot of people go through, rather than being able to step back and go, I'm going to validate, to use your word, and appreciate your journey, your worldview, and realize you are not my enemy. No. You're not an idiot or ignorant. You're just different. Wow. And that's okay. That's okay.
Josh, that is spot on, right? So I'm going to find that book. I'm going to read that book.
Yeah, well, it's such a good book. Such a good book.
How you explain that is spot on how I think about it, right? I really do think, sometimes thinking we can project our own kind of experience, our own thoughts, our own beliefs on people, and we do good to listen to people and to hear their perspective and to try to understand why they think that way, but to also understand that we might not necessarily ever agree on this point or on any point. I think is critically important, right? And so as you think about this work, we have such polarization that happens, right? And there's fire to that all the time, right? And I would venture to say that there's fire coming from all sorts of places, right?
Sure.
Some might say, well, it's fire coming from this person or this place, and some might see. I think that there's a responsibility that all of us have, right, to navigate and again come to the middle, right? Where's the common ground, right?
Yeah.
We may not, after we've gone through what is important to us, what we believe, why we believe it, and given our perspectives, we may not ever come to this agreement about this. But I think most people really want to see people thrive and survive and do okay in life. You know what I mean? Most people want, if I try to think about my children, if I think about your children, if I think about the people in the community, I want them to be all right. I don't want them to feel a certain way, like they don't belong somewhere or whatever, some things that I felt in my life sometimes. And so I think that's important to recognize. How do I always try to see perspectives and not jump on bandwagons, but let's find the common.
Yeah.
Right? How do I do that?
Yeah. No, I think that's huge. And there's so many things going on in my mind right now. But one of the things you kind of said about finding common ground, understanding perspectives, and this kind of goes back to some of the stuff we actually did talk about, not the surprise stuff. But I think finding that like common language, and not necessarily that you speak what I speak, but just that I know what you mean when you say something. And so I can put to rest whatever fears I have about your motivations, and I can put to bed whatever, nervousness I may have about where this may go. And just because I know your heart, I know what you mean when you say something. And so it's like, no, like I know him, like we have relationship, which goes back to that polarization, right? Like when we get people in the same room having normalized conversations about stuff that might have been fearful in the past, but now it can be normal.
Yeah.
I can learn, I can grow in worldviews and in perspectives that I didn't have. So with that said, like let's just do some foundational work here. Okay. When you say diversity, what do you mean when you say that?
Simply, I mean difference. And so when I say, and you'll find about me that I try not to be complex about anything because I'm not the smartest person in the world. I can't be very complex about it. And so I believe just simply diversity means difference, and that could mean it does mean a lot of different things, right? Most times we think about race and ethnicity and gender identities and all those things. Those are the kind of big buzz things specifically in diversity, equity, inclusion that you hear about. But it's so much more when I think about the work that we're trying to do. But it's about cognition, cognitive ability. It's about experiential difference, And so it's so many other things that it's about, right? And so how do we, deal with those things that are, and the reason why those things are just kind of out there in the center is because the data shows that we really have some gaps and disparities there, right?
That's right.
But also the value in diversity goes much beyond when we think about those like kind of Title VII kind of things, right? It goes much beyond that. And so what I try to do as best as I can, yes, we're going to have these things on the table and we're going to deal with those things, but let's also understand all the other things diversity is about and what that brings to the table, right, for us.
Yeah, and I like it because I agree with you. I think if we can just keep it simple and just kind of understanding like it's just differences, and those differences are they're not anything to be feared, but we have a responsibility to learn them so that we can care for the person across the table, which I think that leads us into that conversation of equity. What does that look like to make certain we're people who care for others across the table and who are other than us? How would you define equity for us and kind of your perspective?
Well, equity quite simply to me is, because we lived in this world and I grew up thinking about this word equality, right? I thought about it and how important it was. I heard Martin Luther King talk about it and I heard civil rights leaders and even my grandmother, we talk about equality. We just kind of want equal. And the reality is equal's okay, but the reality is what we really need is equity because everybody has different, places where they start. Whatever that means in life, right? Whether it's work or whether there's ability to understand or read, write, whatever it might be, we all start at different places and we all need different things to help us get to the baseline, right? I think about as I was in elementary school, I didn't come in because of the family I grew up in. I didn't come in with the language, the words that I needed to come in. I didn't come in knowing basic addition and subtraction like some kids do. What that teacher has to do for me is has to spend extra time with me to accelerate my ability, not to so much pass the people that are there, that are at that level, but to get me to a place where I can have a reasonable starting point with them, right?
Yeah.
And so equity to me is really about that.
Yeah.
It's about how do we give people what they need at the point they need it. All right. And so the example I always use is if I went into a community and nobody had shoes. Equality says give everybody a pair of 6 shoes, right? But equity says we need to give people the shoe that they need that fits them, right?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how I explain equity.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I think in the work context, I think a phrase I've kind of gravitated to, and this may be smart or not smart, but it's the one that seems to make sense right now, language-wise for me, is in a workforce area, like what we're kind of talking about for our companies, is contextualized career paths.
Okay.
And part of it is like, as a manager, I just need to know you, or you as my manager, you just need to know me, so that you can help me know where I'm starting at, know what I'm good at, what I'm not good at. And let's just have conversation about where I would like to go, where you think I could go. And let's put a contextualized career path together for people so that they can, based upon where they're starting and where they would like to go and where we might be able to help them go, get them to options and places.
We've seen successful leaders. We've seen transformational leaders, transactional leaders. We've seen all kinds of leaders, right? We've seen people that have that are really great with people, and we have seen people that are really great operationally, and both those people can lead well, right?
That's right.
So it really is understanding. Like I may have a gap here or there or whatever, and that's okay. But giving people the opportunity, right, to grow in that area, to grow in that gap. When you think about the workplace, and not discount, because this is the kind of leader we've always sought.
Yes.
We've always looked for this competency. We've always looked for this knowledge. We've always looked for these skills. We've always looked for this experience. I've recognized that we can have successful leaders that have different skill set and they have different strengths, and that can be good. And I agree, that's a part of equity.
Yeah, I like it. The third one here, how do you define kind of foundationally inclusion?
Yeah, so inclusion is really about making sure that not only, and you've probably heard this before, not only do I have a seat at the table, and not only do I have a voice at the table, which is moving in the right direction, but that my voice actually is warranted and is wanted, and that it's valued and that it's listened to, right? I don't know how many times I've been in a room growing up in business, right? And here I am, the only black guy in the room, right? And I'm trying to contribute to the conversation, right? And so many times you say something and people just look at you, and it's this like really weird pause. And but then I know so many times I see like just people, like somebody might say the exact same thing a different way than I did, and it's acknowledged, right? And so just those type things, it's knowing that not only am I sitting here in the room, because that's important. I mean, sometimes you don't even have an opportunity to be in the room. But not only am I sitting here, but what you bring here that's different is value.